Well, hello, my farmtastic friends. Farmer Phil here again. I've got a question for you. If the check engine light pops up on the vehicle you're driving, what do? Well, if you're my Uncle Tom, you just keep driving the thing till it dies. But any normal person would go to the garage and get the mechanic to look at that check engine sign, right? Just to check and see what's going on. Well, folks, my check engine light came on this past fall. Very, very stressed, awake at night with a knot in my stomach thinking about tomorrow's work and tomorrow's list of things to do. Not getting a good night's sleep because of that, and it just took its toll on me. Blood pressure was way too high. Doctor was not happy about that. So, in the next couple of weeks, I'll be seeing a psychologist. My goodness, never thought I'd do that. I'm a tough guy. I don't need that, right? No. Turns out I've got PTS from all the stress we deal with on a daily basis at the farm, and a few little sticks in the spokes of my wheels there personally as well. Alex had a hip surgery a couple of years back. That kind of set me off. And then Farmer Tony, our right-hand man at the farm, had a heart attack and strained relationships with my father. Oh my goodness, family relationships. Add paying bills and government forms, and thank goodness we don't have any financial problems at the farm. But add that to the mountain of things going on, and yeah, the stress, it just compounds, and every little bit is a straw on the poor little camel's back. And seeing how February is Mental Health Month, we found it appropriate to dedicate this week's Farm to Food podcast to that very subject. Here's hoping that the next couple of conversations blow those mental health taboos right out of the water for you.
Welcome to the Farm to Food podcast. I'm Hugh Maynard, publisher of the Gleaner newspaper, the team that brings you this podcast every second week. This episode, we're going to delve into, a challenging subject, mental health, mental well-being on the farm, amongst farmers, amongst farm families who are also affected by the same kinds of issues and questions and challenges that the farmer is. And it is a topic of our time, particularly post-COVID, with a lot of changes that have occurred. Social media has become quite evident, a large player in people's mental health and well-being. And of course, it may come as a surprise because many people think of farmers living out in the country, the fresh air, out in the fields, no stress of the city and all those other kinds of things. But there are many other stresses, sources of anxiety and worry that farmers have to deal with. Financial markets go up and down, changing consumer trends for their products. The environment is a big one. And the list goes on of what farmers have to deal with. And then everything that they plan to do is disrupted by the weather and changes everything all over again. So mental health, dealing with depression, with anxiety, with the worry of the future is a significant issue. And it may surprise a lot of people, but farming, ranching, are amongst the occupations with the highest rates of suicide, which is something that we don't really talk about very much. But most people, when you have the conversation in the farm community about that subject, it will have touched them at some point in their life. My guest is Merle Massie, who is the executive director of the Do More Agricultural Fondation, which is an organization that works on raising awareness around mental health in the farm community, toolkits, preventative measures, and just generally trying to engage the discussion, as we're doing today, around the whole question of mental health in the farming community, which is important, as it is for everybody, but particularly important because the circumstance of farmers living in isolated communities, rural settings, and the stress and strains of operating a farm, everything from financing to weather and finding manpower. There's a lot of different things we'll explore. So welcome, Merle.
Thank you so much for having me, Hugh.
You're in the thick of it. Maybe just give it an overview of what the More Ag Foundation does.
Absolutely. So the Do More Agriculture Foundation was founded in 2017 by farmers, for farmers, was awarded charitable status in Canada in 2019, and we've been growing, bootstrapping ourselves along ever since. And so the mental health and agriculture conversation has been around for a long time. It certainly didn't start when we arrived in 2017. It didn't start with research that was in sort of 2015 and in the English side, earlier 2005, 2006 on the French side. It's actually much older than that. The first farm crisis line was set up in Saskatchewan in the early 1990s. And so recognizing that the stresses and strains that happen within farms and farming communities are significant, and they're different, and they're different enough that they need their own level of interest, a level of action, level of support.
So I remember, and it must be 20 years ago, I've been like yourself, involved in the farm community for all my life, a good part of my life. And I remember the news that the coeur familles respite home had been established in Saint-Hyacinthe, and in a respite home for farmers to get away from the farm for the weekend by themselves or with their family to take care of mental stresses. And I said, well, why did they need to do that? It never occurred to me that there needed to be a formal sort of step like that, and particularly for farmers. So what makes a farm different in terms of looking after a farmer or their family's mental well-being?
Hugh, when you ask a farmer this, the first answer that you're going to get are what I call the socially acceptable answers. So you're going to hear them talk about weather, crops, prices, labor, all of those things that are really, really difficult for a farmer to control, because we have no control over any of those things. And running a business where you have no control over some of the things that have the most impact on what happens on your farm, it's already, set yourself up for a really, really difficult situation. There are two other levels that I like to also put forward. And one you've already touched on, and that's that issue around isolation. And so farms are, of course, in rural spaces. We know that we've got rural access issues when it comes to mental health that are different than urban issues. We know that farming can be quite an isolating experience. You're on your own. Everything's on your shoulders. You've got seasonality, right? So you've got times of the year where, no, you can't just get off the combine and go drive 3 hours away to go to a therapist. Like, you're busy, right? And so that seasonality is a factor that comes in. You've got farm animals in some cases that, you can't leave them and take a holiday for the weekend. So those are kind of the secondary level. We don't hear about those quite as much, but they are there. And then there's the third level, and these are the ones that we don't hear about as much. And yet it's the difference between what's on your head and what's on your heart. So more than 90% of Canadian farms, I think it's close to 95, are still run by families. So you have issues like intergenerational conflict. You've got relationships, right? Are you getting along with your brother-in-law? Are you getting along with your dad? Are you going to be the generation where the farm gets sold outside the family, or it gets broken up because of a divorce, or all of these sorts of things that really put pressure. And then within that, zooming through, is that sometimes when it comes to mental health, we've had a culture of not talking about it. And so people don't always recognize what's happening and get help early enough. And so they'll turn to other ways to get help, or other ways to try and address what's happening. So we have higher alcohol rates, we have higher drug abuse rates, we have higher domestic abuse rates. We've got some problematic things that are sort of also part of this package. And so that's how I like to kind of think about it, as sort of these three levels. All are true, and we kind of need to work on all of them.
So, to steal a line from our good friend Bill Canada, let's talk. So how do we get people in the farm community where there is a stigma, there's exposure, because, in most farm communities there's only a few farmers, less than 3% on average, and finding somebody who understands your situation to talk about it and to work through. So how do we get the farm community, farmers, farm families, to open up and talk about this more, knowing that it's difficult just as individuals in any context?
I think that there's some levels to that too as well, Hugh. Number one of the things that Do More Agriculture does is that we go right to communities. Communities can apply to us through the community fund to access some additional workshops for their community. And these are not therapy workshops. These are workshops to help people in their community feel more confident and comfortable having these conversations about mental health, because that is absolutely part of the solution, is that all of us need to grow our comfort level and our confidence to having regular conversations with one another. We have all kinds of conversations about diabetes or, any kind of health scare or heart attack. And we all show up with casseroles and, we swing into the fields and we take the crop off and we show up for each other when it's a physical health issue. We tend to step away and step back when it's a mental health issue. And so the way that we treat these two things is part of that culture that we're looking to change. How do we always step forward to extend that offer of help? Another thing that Dijumor Agriculture and other colleagues across Canada have done is to make sure that therapists also understand agriculture. So I'll speak just from Dumor's perspective, but we run Ag Culture, which is a program where therapists who regularly work with farmers can come and learn a little bit more about agriculture. It's a free program that we offer once a month, and you can go on our website and find it. And so what that does is that if a farmer does have the courage to reach out and go to a therapist, you want to make sure that that therapist understands agriculture, that they're not going to accidentally say, oh, just stop work on Friday at 5:00 and come back on Monday morning.
Take it easy, take a break.
Yeah. And he's a dairy farmer and it's like, right, that's right. Or he's got chickens to feed, or he's got hogs, or whatever it is, right? Understanding the situation really does make a difference. It allows a therapist to have that better clinical connection. We also do have a new national level call line. So the Canadian Centre for Agricultural Wellbeing has a new national level call line. And all the people who answer the call line on the back end are also trained in agriculture. So that's another level of support and help. Because if you were to call a call line, if you were in that kind of a crisis space, it does help to make sure that the person that you're talking to on the other end understands ag.
I'm interested in, because I hate to exaggerate it, but the Great Divide, the agricultural community has already and is quickly dividing into very large farms that are producing a lot of food. They're more like corporations, even if they're family owned. And then now the majority of the farms in Canada are smaller farmers, most of whom are working off the farm. So they're carrying two jobs to keep the farm going. Do you see a difference between those two types of farmers in terms of how they struggle with events and the weather and the finances and their ability to deal with mental well-being?
I would say that if you're a larger corporate farm, that maybe those legacy pieces don't impact you quite as much, but you still have the same number of acres, right? You're still trying to get seed across the same number of acres in the same seeding window and the same harvest window. And so those seasonal pressures are still there. What we do see is some of those larger corporate farms are paying more attention, and they're having morning tool talks. And sometimes they're incorporating mental health as part of that morning tool talk. So physical health, farm safety, making sure that all their workers are practicing good safety practices, whether it's confined space or falls or, shutting off the PTO shaft before you go work on the machinery, whatever it is, as well as adding in those mental health moments. And so those can become sort of practices that when we say corporate farms, every farm, unless you're still running it through your personal income tax, most farms, have their own separate corporate entity, right? And I think that every farm can incorporate these kind of little tool talk bits just to pay attention. Because when we pay more attention, we fold it into our day. It becomes a regular thing that we think about.
So, and of course, family matters, right? And some farms are quite extensive in terms of the family that's involved with cousins and, as you say, in-laws and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of conversation going on anyway. And then some are quite small and not so much. What do you suggest, or what does the expertise in the background suggest in terms of preventative measures in looking at ways to start talking before it really does become an issue?
One of the best preventative measures is actually acknowledging everybody who's part of the farm and acknowledging their contribution. And so some of the research is pretty clear that when people feel acknowledged and supported in terms of their own input to their farm, their own, let's say, at their own work, and in terms of and valued for the work that they contribute to continue that farm, that's actually a huge protective factor. Another protective factor is that we run a bit of a risk if we always talk about mental health in the negative, because when you own a farm, right, you have this wonderful geographic space that you own. You can do all kinds of things with that farm. Like you want to build a shop in a particular way. You want to change your corral system. You want to, do what I did last year, which was I actually built myself a walking labyrinth using the stones off of our stone piles. So we pick the stones off the fields in the spring after we seed and we dump them into these rock piles. And they just sit there, right? And I went and I scavenged all these rocks from all these different rock piles. And I built myself a walking labyrinth on my farm that I use for meditation. Now, meditation's not for everyone, but just the process of creating that, I was taking something that was rejected from our farm side and using it right there on our farm to create a space for myself. And I know that there are farmers across Canada. I've heard of farmers who've created golf courses on their farm, or they've got their buddies, all come camp on their farm. I've got other people who have built a bunch of trails on their farm, or they hunt, on their farm. I've got others one guy who writes a newsletter quarterly about his farm. There's all these fun things that we also do when we have these beautiful rural spaces, and those are also protective factors.
I never thought of picking up stones out of the field as a fun activity, but there you go, eh?
I was so strong by the time I was done. I was ripped.
You are going to get hired by every farmer in Canada. Yeah, come over and build me a walkway. So you sound remarkably upbeat for somebody who has to work in a very challenging area. How is it looking? Are we making progress? Are we changing the dynamic? What's coming down the pipeline?
It's an interesting time to be part of what we do, because with social media, we are seeing a lot more people talking about and being more open about these conversations. So we're also seeing more people reaching out for help, calling those call lines, going to therapy. We've got so many therapists across Canada and various groups in each province that will connect a farmer with a therapist who understands agriculture. And in some cases, even pay for the first 4 or 6 or 9 or 12 sessions, because those can be pretty expensive, right? They're not covered by Medicare. And so we're seeing a higher level of use of these services, which I'm happy to see. I'm sad to see, right? It's kind of both. I wish that we didn't need to have these services in place. I'm so glad that there are colleagues across Canada who have stepped into those gaps and created those services.
Right. And we're going to talk about one of them later on in the podcast, the Sentinel program in Quebec, where they're, for each concession, each rural route, they try to have somebody that is a local contact who's not necessarily on the front line, but is a conduit into, if you want to talk, if you think you need some help, then here, let's see what we can do together, which is quite an interesting approach. In terms of the system, right, writ large, what's the one thing you'd like to see the system do?
I would like to see 2 pieces related to that. I'd like to see every province write a bit of a policy that says that they will put the international guidelines of at least, I believe it's about 7% of funding towards mental health, just to address that need, because we know that some provinces are far below that, which is quite problematic. And the second piece to go along with it, to create policies, build policies that allow that address some of the fact that so many of the specialists that are required are situated in those urban centers. So it means a long commute for farmers to access if they do need that higher level of specialist services. I know our rural community had a great program where a psychiatrist came out from the city once a month to our local hospital and had one day a month where they saw all of their local clients. And that was a huge help for people in a rural community, right? It saved us that additional travel for those who needed to access that. So that's an idea that I would put forward. But those are the 2 pieces, is to pay attention overall to the amount of funding that you're putting towards mental health. And number 2, make sure that you are finding a way to that rural residents have more equitable access.
Okay, great. And the Do More Ag Foundation has a website with podcasts of its own and resources, domore.ag. So you can pick up on all the work that Merle and her team are doing to help towards the cause.
Thanks, Hugh. I want to just send a second on our podcast. It's quite different. So there are a lot of wonderful mental health podcasts out there, and they kind of come in two streams. One stream is they'll interview experts such as psychiatrists or psychologists or yoga instructors who have great ideas. Those are kind of one stream. A second stream of mental health podcasts, they'll interview people who have lived experience, also an excellent stream. We've created a third stream. It's all about inspiring communities, about things that communities can do to create a better conversation, cultivate that conversation for mental health, and give people ideas of what they can do to reach out and help one another, increase everyone's courage and confidence. It's really important for Do More to recognize that when it comes to mental health, what happens is people tend to clinicalize it. It's like, oh, you need help. Yep. You need to go get help, right? Like I can't be part of this. And yet we don't have, like, I know nothing about triple negative breast cancer, but when my friend says she's got it, I show up with casseroles and GoFundMe's and whatever, right? You know, but when it's mental health, people step away. And so trying to expose that dynamic and trying to give people action items of things that they can do in their community, that's what our podcast is all about.
Well, my own experience is, of course, the thought that regardless of how sane or stable people might think I am, right? I have mental issues, you know, we all do, right?
We all do.
Not overwhelming or, you know, debilitating or that kind of aspect. But that's what I think people tend to set aside is that we're all in this boat together. Right?
They think they're the only one, right? You know,
that's
when you get sick, you feel like you're the only one. And yet, no. But there's so much of it all over. The other piece that, and I hope that came through when I kind of went through the three levels. People tend to think about the socially acceptable stuff and they forget that we've got a lot of deep issues and things going on. Sure. And that doesn't even touch the fact that a lot of these are illnesses that could benefit from clinical support.
Right.
And so one of the programs that you referenced is the Sentinel program in Quebec. Fantastic.
What a great word to end on. Thank you so much, Merle.
Thank you so much for having me.
So it's a very significant issue and well worth a conversation over. And Sarah, in addition to being the news editor for the Gleaner, you're also a farmer. And also involved in working with farmers on the whole issue of mental health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I do have a co-own an organic vegetable farm, and very recently became a member of the local Sentinel or Gatekeeper network, which involves a 7-hour-long workshop on dealing with suicide and helping to identify when people may be at risk and trying to make sure that they are able to get the help and the resources that they need at that particular moment in their lives. And so, yeah, it was a very interesting day for sure.
And this is a program that was started some years ago by the Union des Producteurs Agricoles, the UPA, which is the General Farm Organization. And amongst the first programs, I think, to formally recognize that indeed mental health was an issue with their members amongst the farms and the farmers and needed more than just superficial, pamphlets and other kinds of things to deal with.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it was produced in collaboration with the Association Québécoise de Prévention du Suicide, so the Quebec Association for the Prevention of Suicide. And essentially it was to help prevent people from completing suicide within the farming community because it was becoming, sort of a crisis. And this network of Sentinels, or in English it translates to gatekeeper, so they're referred to as gatekeepers in English. But this network of Sentinels has been established across the province, and it identifies and helps these people who are considered at risk. It's been very positive, and it's something that the UPA has been maintaining for years, but it hasn't been offered to the English-speaking community up until now. And so one of the interesting things about the local UPA syndicate for the Haut-Saint-Laurent is that they have a status, if you will, a bilingual status. And so they're able to actually advocate on behalf of the English-speaking farm community. And they noticed, and they brought it to the Confederation and the Federation's attention last year through a resolution that was passed in February that the mental health services, the information that was available online was only available in French. And so this resolution demanded that there was translations and that these services be provided in English. And it was a huge, huge step in the right direction as far as helping our farmers in the area get the help that they need. Because when you are obviously in a crisis situation, being able to speak your own language and your first language.
And we all know how it is trying to talk about health issues in another language.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this January, there were two Sentinel programs that were run in English for the first time, including one in the Haut-Saint-Laurent. And there was a decent group of us that actually went through the training. And yeah, so now that possibility exists in our area. So some of the things that we talked about, during that training was really the reason that this network of Sentinels or Guardians was created. And I mean, beyond the fact that there was a high suicide rate amongst the farming community, and it really is shockingly higher. There are some statistics that say it's almost double the rate of the general population, which is concerning, obviously. But for the people who were sitting around the table, it was also something that it became really obvious that just how prevalent it is, even in a small community like ours. Every single person sitting around the table had been directly or indirectly impacted by suicide in their life. And so it's a really serious issue when you start to actually think about the impact that it has on a local community. And some of the reasons that they talked about the importance of this network is that farmer support networks actually just revolve usually around their farms. Their friends are farmers. They go to the farm, they live on the farm, they work on the farm, and sometimes up to 16, 18 hours a day. They don't leave the farm all that often. They're also much more likely to confide in somebody who's visiting the farm regularly. They're less likely to talk about their problems with healthcare professionals. They're not necessarily aware of the different kinds of support resources that exist. And the resources, frankly, are not well suited to their situation because farming is such a unique profession. For all the reasons that you mentioned, there's just everything can be going fine and then it doesn't rain for 3 months.
Or snow, or frost, early frost, or hail, any number of different calamities that just appear out of nowhere.
Yep. I think most people have at least a slight measure of control over what's happening in their day-to-day lives. And farmers, in some cases, it's putting out fires one after the other. And yeah, it takes a toll. Some of the other things we talked about, are the stress factors, right? And so it really is, there's financial uncertainty, but the barriers to mental health services is a big one. And so one of the main role of this Guardian Sentinel is that if somebody is in a bit of a crisis, if somebody is, having suicidal thoughts, those sorts of things, somebody can come in. This Guardian is trained to intervene, ask those very difficult questions, ask them very quickly, and find out where they are in that trajectory of suicidal thoughts. If they're at the point where they have a plan, if they're at the point where they have a means, those sorts of things, then they need help right away. And so it becomes the Guardian's job at that point, or the Sentinel, to try to get them help as fast as possible, but not provide that help because obviously we don't have that.
It takes a certain amount of expertise. And even if it's not thoughts of suicide, anxiety, depression, how do you adjust to finances that haven't worked out? The crop that wasn't produced, where do you go to deal with these kinds of things? And I think a lot of us know that talking to somebody and seeking some help is always helpful. But how do you get to that stage? When do you act? And where do you go?
Mm-hmm. And because farmers are so much on their farm, sometimes some of the issues that they're actually dealing with are, within their family, within their relationships, those sorts of things. And at that point, it's really isolating because who do you go to at that point? And so having, like you said, that person that you can talk to. Not everybody in the training was a farmer. Some of them had jobs that were sort of, indirect and very directly involved in agriculture, but they were somebody who's on the farm often enough and who people tend to talk to. And to be perfectly honest, one of the reasons I was interested in the training wasn't necessarily because I'm a farmer and I work on the farm. it was because I wind up speaking to farmers a lot through my job as a journalist. And sometimes things just come up in an interview offhand, and you wind up sharing things with each other. And I just needed and I wanted to know a little bit more about what I could do and how to help and where to go if that ever were to come up. Because like everybody else, I've been affected by suicides in my lifetime as well, and by mental health issues. So.
Sarah Rennie interviewed Pierre Rivard, who is a training specialist with the Montreal Suicide Prevention Centre, about his role training individuals to become sentinels or gatekeepers within their communities. Gatekeepers act as the first line of defence in suicide prevention by recognising, supporting and directing at-risk individuals to professional help. The Union des Producteurs Agricoles, the UPA, has been running these workshops for a number of years in the farming community, but Pierre was involved in training the first English-speaking gatekeepers, Sentinels, as workshop leaders for the first 2 training sessions in English in Quebec, which took place in January 2026.
So I'm here with Pierre Rivard, who is a training specialist with the Centre de Prévention du Suicide de Montréal. And we are talking a little bit about the Gatekeeper program, or the Sentinel program in French. And this is a training that I participated in a couple of weeks ago, and it's something that the Union des Producteurs Agricoles has been involved with doing for many, many years. But this was the first time that it was offered to agricultural producers and people in that community in English in Quebec. So hello, Pierre.
Well, hello. I'm glad to be here with you.
So maybe you could tell me just generally what is a gatekeeper? What is the Sentinel program? And maybe you could tell me a little bit about how long you've been giving these workshops.
Yes. Well, I've been giving the workshops for about 4 years now. And in the province of Quebec, we have close to 60,000 sentinels now in various industries. You know, people that are trained, it's a one-day training, this gatekeeper training, where people learn to identify signs of distress and how to connect, create a trusting bond with the individual who's not doing well, and asking the right question, and then referring them to people who can help them out.
Mm-hmm. So then you often do work within different or specific sectors. This wasn't the first time that you've worked in with a specific kind of group.
Yeah, we work with First Nations. We work in psychiatric hospitals. We work in detention centers. Any organizations in Montreal that help individuals. We work in universities, CEGEPs. So, yeah, we're very diversified. That's because, unfortunately, distress is a little bit everywhere. There are so many people. There's an estimate that we think there's maybe 100,000 Quebecers every year that have suicidal thoughts.
That's a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I have some statistics that you might be interested in. One way to count the statistics is out of 100,000 people. So in Quebec, in the general population, and actually this is good for the entirety of Canada, there's 11.4 people out of 100,000 that will complete suicide. But in the farming community, that number goes up to 31.4 people out of 100,000. So there's at least 20 more people per 100,000 if you're in the farming community that will complete suicide on a yearly basis. So that's scary. It's something that we need to be concerned about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I think the numbers are in Quebec, the numbers are a little bit higher than I think sometimes in the rest of Canada too.
Yeah. So, and you know what? I've given the gatekeeper training twice now to the farming community. And something that strikes me is, because the first time I provided a training, I thought, the people attending are probably going to be older men, older farmers. But no, in the vast majority, it's women that show up. They're the wives, a lot of times the partners of the farmers that show up. And it's something that's very common. You know, the majority of the calls that we get at the Montreal Suicide Prevention Centre are from women. And so what that tells us is that men in general, there's always exceptions, but men are not comfortable opening up. Men have difficulties asking for help. They isolate themselves. They want to be very stoic. And unfortunately, often when we ask them the simple question, how are you? Their response is going to be, I'm okay. I'm good. You know, I can get through this. And so it's very important to work on building a trusting bond with these men. And I'm focusing on men because 75% of suicides in Quebec are completed by men.
Wow. Yeah, that's a scary statistic as well.
Absolutely. So the goal of the training is to demystify asking the question. You know, a lot of people are afraid that if they ask the question, and what I mean by the question, I'm talking about asking, are you thinking of suicide? Are things so difficult right now that you're thinking of killing yourself? So I'm talking about using the right words and not beating around the bush, right? So I want to demystify the myth that may be around asking that question, because once you ask that question, that's when the healing starts, you know, because you're there present with somebody who's suffering. You're a witness to what they're experiencing, and you're building this trusting bond with them by being very concerned and asking the right questions, and then guiding them towards the support that they deserve.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, the training itself, I have to say, it's a very sort of intimate training. You're there with not that many people. You're sharing some personal stories, that sort of thing, and then there's role playing and that sort of activity involved in the training. So it becomes a very close knit group, I think, by the end of the day. Do you ever hear back from the people who have done these trainings?
Yes. People can reach us 24/7 at our phone number. There's a Quebec-wide phone number, the 1-866-277-3553. That's the 1-866-APPEL. And we receive calls from a lot of gatekeepers, people that say, hey, I took your training a few months ago, and guess what? You know, last night I was speaking with someone who told me they wanted to kill themselves. And it was very scary, but I felt equipped. I felt confident in working through the situation, and I referred them to the right organization. So I just wanted to let you know that. So that happens regularly where we get people like that. Sometimes we get calls from social workers, psychologists, people that took suicide prevention training maybe a few years ago, and now they're kind of forgetting things, and they need to just check in. They need to be validated on what they're doing, what their intervention is like.
Do you have any data? Is there any information on how effective this program is?
Well, about 25 years ago, the suicide rate in Quebec was going through the roof. I mean, we had about close to 1,900 individuals every year that completed suicide in Quebec. And that's when the government said, you know what, we need to implement some sort of training. We need to do something, because right now this is a crisis that we're experiencing. So training was implemented over the past 25 years, right? It was developed and it's refined constantly. And today, the suicide rate went from about 1,900 down to 1,100. So, that's 800 people less per year that are completing suicide. So we love that number, and we want to keep heading in the right direction with that.
And I guess it's easy at that point to assume then it's because, to a certain extent, somebody is talking to that individual who is in crisis.
And that's the goal of having gatekeepers throughout the province of Quebec, in the farming community, in large cities, whether it's suburban areas, everywhere. We need people that have an understanding of the distress that people can be experiencing, and that will be looking out for them. One thing that I always mention in training is that people that are experiencing a suicidal crisis, it's as if their frontal lobe is in a storm. They're having a hard time coming up with solutions, right? And so we become the trained people, we become the surrogate frontal lobe of that individual. It's almost like we're the lighthouse on a safe shore trying to guide the ship that's in a storm to safe harbor.
Mm-hmm. And in the agricultural community, of course, there are so many things that are just outside of an individual's control that you can imagine that storm can sometimes, be quite hectic.
Oh, yeah. It's very specific in the agricultural community, and I think the vast population may not be aware of it. I mean, we see some things in the news, new recommendations, new protocols that farmers have to abide by, but we're not really sure just how much pressure it puts on their shoulders, the financial aspect of things, and there's so many things that we're not aware of, like the lack of water, animals getting sick, etc. Everything will have a huge impact on farmers, and just the weather not cooperating will have a huge impact on people's livelihoods. And most of the population are not really aware of what farmers are going through.
Mm-hmm. And then farmers, of course, go through the same things that people in major cities do. Relationships, come to an end. Upsetting things happen within our lives all the time.
Absolutely, yeah. Medical diagnosis, just equipment breaking down. If my car breaks down in Montreal, I take the metro. But if you're on the farm and your truck breaks down, it can cost you a pretty penny to get it fixed. So.
Mm-hmm. So I guess maybe you've been giving these trainings for a while. You also mentioned that sometimes you are working the phones at the center, those sorts of things. When it comes to suicide prevention, what do you think is the most important thing to communicate? Just to everybody, to the general population.
I think it's to active listening is so important. To actually validate the individual who's suffering, to share some empathy, and to really connect, to create a trusting bond with that individual. It's as if, if you have a bad day at work and you get home and you need to vent to your partner, it's good to have someone there who won't interrupt you, somebody who will just listen to you. I think that's the foundation of suicide prevention, is to make ourselves available to hear out what is the reality for this person, what are they experiencing, and then you're building this trusting bond with the individual, and then eventually you can guide them with the proper resource that can help them out.
And do you have anything that you might say to someone who is maybe listening now or and is considering possibly becoming a gatekeeper or a sentinel within their community?
Yeah, well, I would definitely encourage you to contact the Montreal Suicide Prevention Centre. That's at the cpsmontreal.ca. That's our website. And we have information on the trainings there. So, contact with it. We'll be right back in touch with you. And we'll see, because Gatekeeper is one training that we offer, but we offer half a dozen various trainings that, so we would look at what is your exact need, and we would go from there with you.
And certainly from within the agricultural community, like I said, these are the first two workshops that have now been offered. Hopefully we'll be able to, the UPA will be able to sort of partner with you guys again and be able to offer more, because I think it was just an invaluable way to spend a day, honestly. It's one of those things you hope you never actually have to put into use, but I really did get out of the day feeling more prepared in case that ever does happen.
Feeling more prepared, and hopefully everyone in class remembers that you're not alone. You can always contact us and we'll help you out through the situation that you're living while helping others. So it's teamwork.
All right. Well, this has been obviously not the most pleasant subject for a conversation, but it's been very nice talking with you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It is an essential conversation, and thank you for having me on your podcast.
It's been a pleasure, and hopefully we'll get to chat again someday.
So talking about dealing with, even personally, about mental health, mental well-being is always a challenge. And it's admirable that you have taken the step forward to be a sentinel, a guardian, right, to contribute to helping out in whatever way is possible. That's good news, right? People are stepping forward. We have resources now on the web. It's less taboo to talk about some of these things because it's not just about suicide. It's about anxiety. It's about depression. It's about the impact on the farm down the road. But we have the respite home in St. Hyacinthe. We didn't have that 20 years ago. So we have lots of tools and resources, but we still need to talk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's definitely the most important thing is, like you said, breaking down all those barriers. And we need to just be able to talk about our mental health and do it openly and with our friends and family and those people who are important to us. But there's also services, if that's too difficult, there's a lot of services now where you can actually call somebody and you can talk to somebody that you don't know, that is a stranger, but who can get you the help that you do need. And it's important. But we're also starting to see, the UPA, au coeur des familles agricoles, so the home you just referenced, they're starting to promote mental health support services. Last year, there was a text program. It was called the Bonjour, comment ça va program. It was, hi, how are you? And the idea was just checking in on your neighbors and really just getting people to talk, because if we talk more often with our neighbors, we'll be able to find out and we'll be able to tell if something is a little bit off or different. And it's really just supporting each other. We're a tiny community, the agricultural community, so we need to support each other when we can.
Yeah. And we do need some skill, I guess, some aptitude to do these things. But the first step is let's talk.
Yep, definitely.
Now, let's hear a bit about Au Coeur des Familles Agricoles, or ACFA, a Quebec organization that works directly with farmers and their loved ones who are struggling with mental illness. Our reporter, Callan Forrester, spoke with one of their workers, Lise Bates, about the different services they offer and how to look out for the farmers in your life.
So today I'm here with Lise Bates, who works for ACFA. We're so excited to have you on the podcast today to talk a little bit more about mental health. This is obviously a subject that is really special for us in the Valley and really important for us to be talking about. So I was wondering if you could start by introducing yourself and telling me a little bit about ACFA and the work you do there.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on. I work, mainly I'm based in the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean area. I'm a farmer wellness worker. In French, we're called travailleuses de rang or travailleurs de rang. It's a little bit inspired, I guess, from the work that people do in urban areas, people that do interventions mainly on the streets with people that are having various kinds of issues, addiction issues and mental health issues and things like that. So ACFA stands for Au coeur des familles agricoles. It's a community organization that was put together in 2002, and it really came and rose from the needs of the community. It was a person, in particularly a woman, who was doing a lot of mainly worked as an agent. I was doing transfers, farm transfers, that noticed that was a lot of distress, in the farming community. And she basically started this from her house, where she would welcome farmers to come over and talk and do interventions with them. And it grew, and research was done to get some funding to put together this organization. We are provincial, so there's various wellness workers across the province in different territories, depending on the needs. Sometimes we're alone, Sometimes we're two. Certain areas, there are three. I'm alone in the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean area. And basically what I do is I offer services, first-line services in psychosocial intervention. People can refer themselves. Farmers can refer themselves for help. They can ask for help, call directly the number. Or it could also be people that are in touch with farmers in the community who notice that someone isn't feeling too great, someone's not doing too well, and they can call, they can refer, they can remain anonymous, or they can talk to the person and say, look, do you mind if I call? And do it like for the person, call and refer them. So at that point, we have an evaluation service, somebody that evaluates all the demands that come in for help. Sometimes the people will reach the wellness worker directly. Like I get a lot of that through word of mouth. People talk and get to know me. And we also do a lot of representation, a lot of prevention. So we do conferences in schools, CEGEPs, universities. We go to different activities in the communities, farming activities, political activities, stuff like that. So we can do prevention and we can be seen and we can put the word out there that we do exist and don't hesitate, and to provide sensibilisation, like, and demystify the whole stigma that there is around asking for help. Because farmers, the agricultural world, I mean, you know, they're known for being hard workers, for having that traditional masculinity about them where they figure things out themselves. They don't need help. They're a jack of all trades. They can do so many different things that when it comes to mental health, they tend to overlook it and think to themselves they don't need that help, or it's a sign of weakness. So there's a lot of work to do out there to do prevention and outreach.
It's really great that this exists, especially in the context of being able to refer other people too. I think it can be hard sometimes to confront someone directly and say, hey, I think you're struggling, but having this organization sort of help be a third party is I think really useful and kind of takes some of that pressure off. I'd love to know, so once someone comes to ACFA, are you able to connect them with like therapists or doctors if they need medication? Like how does that sort of process work?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we will focus on the needs of the person. So whatever the person is struggling with, we will go to the person. So it's proximity work. So we go directly to the farms. The people don't come to us, we go to them. So that's very original, you know, and the type of work that we do. For sure, if there's a problem that they're working on or they're struggling with, there's many other things that pop up also, because you know we're human, and mental health touches all the different spheres of our life. So we're not therapists. Most of us, I would say 90% of us, are social workers. So we have a degree in social work, and we will refer to the different services, organizations. So we work in partnership. Part of our job is also demystifying those official social services. So yeah, we do work in partnership with different social service or community organizations too. I've had clients where the mothers with young children need help, so they're referred to different kind of family organizations.
Yeah, it's great to have someone to be there with them to show them the steps. I know that, like, you know, I've had my own mental health struggles, and it's hard to know sometimes where you can even begin, who to call, like what to do. And so it's great to have a program that gives those first steps to someone who may not have the experience to know even how to ask for help.
Exactly. And they're, you know, farmers are faced with so many aspects that are out of their control, you know. That they have little control over: the weather, the sick animals, you know, the interest rates, machinery that's breaking all the time. Like they're faced with all these elements that they have no control on. So every day they wake up, they don't know what part of their day is going to be like, what's going to happen. So we try to, you know, bring them back to what they can control, you know, and things that they can learn to accept, you know, and not necessarily tolerate and, you know, aspire for change. But for sure, we want change, you know, but sometimes you have to learn to accept certain things, you know, in your life and deal with it.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. And do you have any tips for people who may want to help someone who is like clearly struggling with some sort of mental illness, but are struggling with that fear of how to reach out or how to help them? Do you have any tips for how we can help and support people?
Yeah. Farmers are humans. We're all humans. The issues, the mental health issues that they face are issues that anybody can face, anxiety, depression, feelings of worthlessness, being overworked, perfectionism, also like different things that affect anybody. And as somebody, a close friend or a family member or whatever, the first thing they can do is like be on the lookout for the signs, be on the lookout, know how to recognize the signs that somebody isn't doing so well, and don't be afraid to talk to them, to listen, to tell them like, hey, I've noticed, you're not doing so well, or, you're kind of tired more these days, or you're sad, and open the conversation. So, listening ears a lot, and empathy, having compassion, having empathy, listening without judgment, listening without necessarily trying to find a solution to their problem, and opening the door to them asking for help, or letting them know that it's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. Asking for help is something that you're doing for yourself, that you're doing, mental health, your brain is an organ. If you broke a leg, or if you had problems with your kidneys, you would, go to the doctor and get help. Well, your brain is an organ. And when your brain is having trouble, well, just like any other, physical problem that you're gonna have, you have to take care of it like you take care of your animals, like you take care of your tractor.
For sure. I'd also love to know if you have any tips for people who are struggling with the stigma around mental illness. I think it can be hard to admit it because there is so much shame associated with it sometimes, which obviously there shouldn't be. Do you have tips for people who are trying to sort of deprogram those thoughts in their brains?
Yeah, like I said, most of us do at some point in our life struggle with some kind of mental health issue. And asking for help is a gift that you're giving yourself. It's something that you're doing for yourself. We only live once. We only have one mental health. We don't have multiple mental healths. So we have to take care of what we have, and asking for help is a step towards getting better. I think when you talk about it in terms of any other health problem, and you take away those negative labels, that can help a lot.
For sure, yeah. And in your experience working with ACFA, have you seen those direct impacts and the influence that you've had?
Sure, yeah, for sure. I see the impact. Sometimes I'll make a first contact with a person that's been referred from a third party, and their first reaction is, "I don't need this," and it's voluntary and it's completely confidential, and we go to them, So I'll tell them like, "Well, how about we just have a talk? And if no strings attached, if you don't want to see me again, there's no problem, You just tell me, or just don't call me back, like." That's fine, you're not signing a contract here with me, and they'll say, yeah, most of them. And then the first time I go there and we do open the door and we start talking about emotions and the right to live your emotions, the right to express those emotions, it opens the floodgates, and people open up and people realize how much that can take pressure off their shoulders and how much better they feel, and they'll want to see me again, and then we'll address different issues that they're, going through. It's such a hard profession, that with no breaks, you're constantly working with your family mostly. So you're living with your family, you're working with your family. A lot of conflicts arise, a lot of communication problems arise. Everything can be said. It's in the way that you say it, but they'll tend to keep it inside, and that will create an abscess, all the things that are not said, and they accumulate and then it busts, and then there's conflict, and then there's distress. And that's when, unfortunately, most of them will ask for help when they're in a crisis, So we're trying to prevent that and say, before that, what are the signs? What can you do before you reach that? How can we help you communicate better? How can we help you take the stress off, organize, prepare, stuff like that?
I'm sure you have a million stories of like the work that you've done, and I'm sure it can be really fulfilling and also really heavy a lot of the time too. It's really admirable that you get to help these people so much.
Yeah, it's, that's my pay. Knowing that these people have enough confidence and trust in me that they'll let me into their homes, into their barns, into their workspaces, and they will open up to me into the most intimate areas of their life. And, and I can make a difference. And I see the impact because one person will tell another and another and another and another. And you see the demands coming in. So you know that you're making a difference,
Yeah. I think that was everything I wanted to ask you about today, but I'd love to open it up if there's anything else that you want to share or last minute advice you want to give.
Yeah, well, maybe something that I forgot to mention is that we're based in Saint-Hyacinthe and we have a respite house here. So we do have 4 rooms available for farmers that would like to take a break, that would want to come here and relax away from the fields, away from the animals. We did it on purpose, deliberately, to set up in city, not downtown, but I mean, we're not in the country, so that they can get away from that and not feel the pressure of, my God, I'm not there working, I need to be working. So they can really come here with a wellness worker that will accompany them, do interventions with them, and mostly let them relax and de-stress, So that is also a service that's available.
Okay, that's great. And if people want to get in touch, they can reach out to the ACFA website or contact you directly. How does that work?
Yeah, I can give you the number. The number is 450-768-6995, or go to our website also.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Well, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me on.
Please check our farmtofood.ca website for our podcast notes, which include some resources you can link to regarding mental well-being for those who work and live in the agricultural sector.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Farm to Food podcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors for helping to bring this initiative to life: the Livestock Breeders Association for our studio facilities at the Expo Ormstown Fairgrounds, and Quinn Farm in Notre-Dame-de-Ile-Perrot for promotional support.
We'd also like to thank the Community Media Strategic Support Fund and the Government of Canada for their financial support, as well as the BEC program for their contribution to equip the podcast studio.
This program is made possible by the volunteer directors on the board of the Chateauguay Valley Community Information Services, a nonprofit social enterprise with charitable status. We would love your support to keep this podcast going. Donations can be made at farmtofood.ca, and we can issue tax receipts for donations over $25.
And, of course, our thanks to Farmer Phil, who opened up the show. Be sure to join us in 2 weeks for the next Farm to Food podcast episode. We'll have more interesting stories about farming and food from the land to your kitchen table. Thanks for listening.